Good leaders coach their team. And if you're an aspiring leader, knowing how to coach your direct reports and other people that you manage is going to affect how productive you are, how productive your teams are. And joining me for this conversation on how to coach your managers or direct reports is Dr. Jeff Kaplan. He is Leadership Coach of the Year, and I'm really excited to have him on this podcast to discuss ways that you can actually do coaching. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Raj. Great to be here.
Well, this is a pretty important topic. Coaching your managers, which are effectively then coaches too. So you're coaching the coach from that perspective. So let's talk about what are the things that a leader needs to know so that they can actually start that whole process and prepare their managers for knowing how to coach.
So here's one of the most important things for a manager to be aware of when they're trying to coach their employees is that the shift when you're stepping out of your supervisor role into a coaching role is that the expertise is within your employee, not you. The mistake that many managers make is I hear this all the time with coaches, is they sit their employee down and they tell them what to do, how to do it. They impart such great wisdom that they have developed over the last X number of years onto their employee who has tuned them out 20 seconds in. And so if you remember that the wisdom is inside the employee, your job as the coach is to pull out that wisdom, engage them. It'll get buy-in. You might be surprised yourself, right? And it'll help them start a course on how to develop whatever it is that they need to develop.
That's important. It's important to get them to feel that empowerment and get going. So are there some things that people need to do to just really get in the right frame of mind to provide a coaching session? Is it something that you say, hey, let's come into my office and we're going to do a coaching session? Or is it just on the spot coaching? What's the best way to do it?
That's a great question. So what's the best way to create a container for coaching? Mm-hmm. So the more that you can be proactive and in a transparent, proactive way, create the space to have a conversation, right? And so one of the tools that I suggest managers do is they create some structure, like it could be a wheel, like a competency wheel, right? Where they or their employee identifies what are the most important competencies or skills for their job, right? So it could be things like decision making or relationship building or selling or whatever it is, right? And then I would say, so let's sit down, to your point, Raj, and have a coaching conversation. So I'm going to take off my manager hat and I'm going to put on my coaching hat. And so, employee, tell me, how do you think you do with decision making? On a scale of 1 to 10, employee, how would you rate your skill level if 10 is really high and 1 is low? Employee says 7. Oh, okay. Now you're thinking 7? I give you a 3, but you hold that back. And you say, okay, a 7. So tell me why a 7, right? And then they go on and they tell you what they tell you. And they say, well, why is it not a 6 and why is it not an 8? Right?
That's what you say to them?
That's what the manager says. Yeah, help me understand why it's not a 6 or an 8, right? Because that really helps. Like, what would a 6 look like? Oh, well, it's not a 6 because, blah, 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 right? And you're thinking, well, that's why it wouldn't be a 1. But again, you hold that back, right? Yeah. And so then they said, well, why not an 8? And then this is the moment. The moment is that they say, well, it's not an 8 because I'm not yet good at X. So you just got your employee to say, I'm not good at X, versus, hey, employee, sit down. You suck at X, right? And so when the employee says, I'm not that good at, or I would like to develop X, you say, great. How can I support you, right? And then you collaborate and figure out strategies and tools and ways to help them develop that particular skill set.
What if the employee doesn't recognize what they're weak at?
Yep.
And is there a way to ask leading questions to get them
Yeah.
to say it? Because to your point, if you tell
Yeah.
them what they're not great at, they won't hear it.
Yeah. So you don't want to ask leading questions. You can ask, what I tell managers is ask curious, open-ended questions and really hang out with them before, you've got, it's like you're playing poker and you can't wait to throw down your four aces, right? You're playing the game and you see, somebody's all excited because they have, I don't know, three jacks or something, and but you've got four aces, right? And you can't, and your four aces are, well, let me tell you the 10 ways that you're terrible at decision making, or whatever, right? And so I'm not saying that you're not going to play those ace cards, but you're going to hold it off and you're going to hang out and say, well, just tell me more, help me understand. Because you're also, Raj, in that moment when you're coaching your employee and you're trying to find out how they see themselves, you're helping to raise awareness, but you're also getting a sense of how they think, right? How they're evaluating their skills, and they're probably missing some big pieces, right? And so there will be a time when you say, okay, well, if it's really bad, you say this. Well, now we have two problems, right? Right now,
Hmm.
again, this is going to give feedback. Let me come back to that in a little bit. I want to talk about the two problems, but you can say, look, what about 2 weeks ago when you did this? And so it's not that you're going to not share with them your own observations, but you want to try to be solution focused, share your observation, and don't try to do as little speaking for your employee as possible. The more you can pull out, the better.
So when you're talking to someone who, let's say, accountability of other team members. So accountability of their direct reports. Sometimes that's something that newer managers, especially, it's a skill that they need to develop. They might be able to hold themselves accountable, but now that they're managing a team and keeping everybody on task, and doing it in a diplomatic way, so that's productive, can be a challenge. So that might be something that a new manager may not realize that they really need help with. So
Yes.
what's a way to ask questions so that they come to realize that that's an area that maybe they need a little guidance on? And then how do you provide input to them so that they can learn accountability techniques?
One of the problems that new managers have is they evaluate, actually, this is a problem that we all have, is we tend to evaluate other people's behavior based on our own paradigms, based on our own way of thinking. So let's say, Raj, that you're highly responsible and dependable and always deliver, which I know you are, and you have an employee who missed a deadline. So you're evaluating that employee's missed deadline based on your own way, how you would evaluate yourself. Wow, it must have really um, been tied up with something, right? And so you kind of let it go. And then before you know it, they're missing a lot of deadlines and they're not even telling you, they're giving you a heads up, right?
Mm.
And so the moment that you let like an expectation that did not get met, that was agreed upon but did not get met, once you let that go, that is passive acceptance. You have just passively accepted that behavior. So
Mm.
how do you hold them accountable, right? First of all, not shaming them, right? Say, come into my office, I want to connect with you about 10 minutes. So 2 weeks ago we talked about this thing, that, and we talked about it. We both agreed that you'd be able to deliver it to me by last Friday. It's now Wednesday, and did I miss it? Like I kept looking at my email, I couldn't find it. Right? Oh, no. I know I got really busy. Okay, so just to reflect back, so you got busy and you weren't able to do the thing that we agreed to. Am I hearing you right? Oh, yeah. I mean, like, we had this big project. Okay. So I hear you. And you know what? You are incredibly busy and you are doing so much. And that can't happen again. right? Like, so the part of it that is problematic is not that you were so busy and you chose, you know, priorities you chose not to do it over the other things that you thought was priorities. But the problem is that I wasn't allowed to be part of that conversation. Like, what I need is just to bring me in that conversation. Like, last Wednesday, you say, "Hey, Jeff, can we talk? It looks like I'm not going to be able to hit this deadline and do all these other things." If you come to me in advance, I can say, "Oh, okay, you know what? Why don't you take this thing that you're doing off the table? Because this thing is really a priority." Right. And so notice that I'm not attacking them. I'm pointing out what happened. And when they try to make excuses, I'm kind of repeating that back, like, "Oh, so what I heard you say was X. So, what's missing with this?" And then ask for what you want.
So I like the way you framed this, because what you're doing is you're coaching your manager on their performance. Now let's take that one level deeper, which is when they need to coach their team in much the
Right.
same way.
Right.
And so, as you coach the manager, are there things that you sort of pause and step back and say something like, okay, do you see what I did here with you? This is how you could emulate that with your, or use that as a model with your direct reports. Is there a way to kind of make them acknowledge or kind of understand through experience how they would be able to relate to their own team members?
Yeah, 1,000%. And I do that all the time. And so one of the things that I would say to managers who are trying to figure out how to coach their direct reports is role play with them, right? Like I do with my clients a lot. With my clients, I'm like, okay, you be that other person and I'll be you, right? And so one of the biggest takeaways that someone can get from this podcast around coaching skills for managers is, if you're going to help if you're trying to teach somebody how to coach somebody below them, is teach them how to role play, right? And say, okay, so, and I would even say, why don't we start with, let me be your employee and you start the conversation. And right then, Raj, you're going to see all the problems, right? Like, and then say, well, how do you think you did? Right. So notice he's still not jumping in and tell them how I thought they did, but then say, okay, why don't we try it again? Right. And
Mhm.
then you can start to piece apart what worked, what didn't work. And then together you can refine it.
Okay, so it's a very structured approach to coaching, providing coaching training for your managers. Um, how often do you need to meet with someone to be able to get them to start changing their behavior or adopting behaviors that will allow them to coach their teams?
Until it's not there anymore. The reality is that, people have these, here's the problem. So what happens is somebody's underperforming and the manager doesn't point it out. Not a good thing. So
Mm.
passive acceptance, right? You're going to continue to get more of it. But then it's like they finally figure out whatever and they have this conversation and say, "Oh, I had a great conversation." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, really? That's good." What part of the conversation do you say, "Okay, I'm glad that we have this set of agreements about, you're going to reach out to me ahead of the time so that I can help you reprioritize whatever the agreement is." Um, when you fail at meeting those agreements, how do you want me to hold you accountable? Right? That's the missing piece. In other words, it, it, it we're going to default to the way that the patterns that we normally use. So you should assume that just because you had a wonderful conversation, they're not going to do it consistently the way that you think that they should do it or the way that they even agreed to do it. So what you do is you say, okay, so how do you want me to help you be successful? And you want to create a culture where people can give each other real-time feedback.
Do you want to meet at least once a week for a check-in, or every couple of days, or like what's the best way to really kind of pace it so that they know, your manager knows that they're kind of getting this ongoing coaching and training, and is that too frequently, because you still have to get the work done and not just have coaching sessions?
It depends on the person. It depends on the context. It depends on the importance and visibility of whatever the work that we're talking about, right? So
Hmm.
some people need a lot more hands-on. I had a leader tell me that his admin wanted to meet with him 2 hours a day at the beginning of the day to set the rest of her day. And like I found this out during a 360, and I'm like, wait, what? 2 hours a day? Like, that's insane. Do you know how much that's costing the organization? Not to mention,
That's 40
you,
hours a
you
month. I mean, that's a 1 week out of the month. Yeah.
that's insane. And so,
Yeah.
but like really figure out, well, what is it that they need? And so what I would say is try to negotiate that with the employee, like what's going to work for you both and what do you need? And the more that the employee feels safe to tell you, listen, I'm kind of struggling around something ahead of time, then if you have that, if they're willing to be that vulnerable with you, then you don't have to meet as frequently. But there are some employees that generally feel insecure and don't want to tell you if they're struggling. They're going to like try to fake it until they make it. And if you have a little bit more of a hands-off approach, it might be too late, right? And so you really need to check in. Okay, so why don't you, what do I need to know? What do you need from me right now? And what else do you want to tell me about this project? And maybe you do that every day, for 5 minutes. It really depends on the situation and the person.
Let me pivot now to a situation which many executives find themselves in, and that is they switched companies. So they've now started in a leadership role at a new company that never really did a lot of coaching before, and they want to bring that skill set to the team that they are now managing, who has never had their previous managers provide coaching before. So, what are the first steps that a new leader can do to provide coaching training for their managers at a new role, new job?
Teach listening and teach asking powerful questions.
Okay.
Right.
And so what would be, like, let's say the first 2 weeks in that role, what should they think about? What kind of meetings should they set up? What kind of conversations should they plan for? What would that look
Well,
like?
so there's a good chance that the organization that leader has entered thinks they're operating just fine. So if you go in right away, new person comes in and tries to make us like their old organization, you will be met with resistance. Welcome resistance. And so instead, the first step is you need to raise awareness. Hey, I wonder what I noticed that these meetings we tend to go off topic often. That's interesting to me. I'm not used to that, right? And then somebody says, "Oh yeah, no, we do it all the time. We love it." And everybody says, "Yeah, we love it. We love the flexibility of these meetings." And you're like, "Okay, note to self, like shelf that one right now." But if somebody else says, "Well, actually, I know, like, I think we could be a lot more efficient." Ah, that's interesting.
What?
Is that good?
Yeah. What about that? Like one of the things that I would think could potentially help is maybe in that first couple of weeks, say to your new team that, hey, one of the ways that my teams in the past have been successful is through coaching. It's not necessarily mandatory for anybody, but I'm here and I'd love to provide coaching to help either fill in the gaps or advance your skill set. Is that a good idea, or is that something that you should really wait on?
I would show them before I told them.
Mm-hmm.
So show before you tell, right? And so ask lots of open-ended, non-leading, non-judging questions, right? And begin. And so people are going to like, wow, like I really like talking to this guy. Wow. Right. And then eventually there's going to be a moment when someone says, wow, I really like talking with you, or I'm curious how your other organization, they're going to ask a question or say something that says, there's my opening. And then you could say, well, yeah, one of the things that I learned in my career, because I used to be like you're talking about, I used to like interrupt people and not really listen, and I didn't really know how to develop employees. And then I learned these coaching skills, and I just find that it's just really helpful in motivating and developing employees, and even holding them accountable. And they say, wow, like, is that something you could teach? It's funny you should ask.
Okay. So kind of ease into that, not come out with all your fireworks going at once.
Yeah, I have a solution. I can't wait to
Yeah.
tell you, even though you don't think you have a problem.
Right. Yeah. Isn't that the case? A lot of times we go providing solutions to problems that either aren't perceived to exist or that we think they exist, but they really don't, or they're really small.
Yeah. It's a solution looking for a problem.
Yeah.
This vendor just sold me on this amazing new $2 million technology that's going to really help us. It's like, really? Like, was that a problem? And are you sure it's worth the ROI? Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's certainly a big factor. So how do you measure the progress that you're making as you provide coaching training for managers?
Well, one of the things I do is I actually give them so I have a template that I fill out, and it has a bunch of like rating questions, like 1 to 5. So my manager listens effectively. My manager demonstrates that they care about my development. My manager holds me accountable in a way that is helpful, right? So a bunch of those kinds of questions. And so what I would say is, if you're truly going to do an intervention where you're going to teach coaching skills and you want to measure, is this working, whether it's with an internal person or an external person, is do some pre-post. Like, ask everybody to fill those out. And then, by the way, you'll be able to see where some of the concerns are. And then your coach training should be focused on those particular areas of weakness. And then do the training, give it a few months, and then do the assessment again. It's like a 5-minute form. And then you can measure results.
Okay. And so, yeah, that'll give you before and after snapshot. Is this a tool that where would someone go to get this type of tool? Is it a structured tool, or is this something that someone can kind of develop on their own for their own company?
Both. I mean, if they email me, I'm happy to send it. They can make their own. They may have, if they don't understand the skills of coaching, then they could reach out to me or someone else who's an expert in it. But yeah, I think that's a good way to go.
Okay. All right. That's good. What are some of the other things that people need to keep in mind as they're coaching their managers to be able to coach? Are there topics we haven't covered yet?
Yeah. One is, and I'm not saying this to you, but is to shut up. Right. Right. So good listening is your eyes are focused on them, not distracted on your phone. Your mouth is quiet and your ears are open. And your ears are open not to, listen for something that you can't wait to tell them, something brilliant that came to mind, but to truly deeply understand what they're saying. Because here's the thing, Raj, when people first start talking, they're talking at a very surface level. This is really important. People need the space to actually figure out what they're trying to say, right? And so if you just jump in at them when they open that first comment, you're not going to get the best of them. But if you really listen and say, "Oh, say more about that," or "Help me understand," and the more that they speak, the more that you not only do you understand what they're saying, but they understand what they're trying to say.
Yeah, I think that's really important, is giving them that space. Very critical. And I like that phrase, listen to understand, not to respond. I think that's really critical in proper training for your managers.
I tell folks, I said, when you're having these conversations, because you're so smart and you're 3 steps ahead of them, and you really are probably 3 steps ahead of them. Then as they're speaking, ask yourself, what am I missing? What else am I missing? What else is here? Like, literally use some sort of anchor where they're talking to themselves to keep them focused. Because what happens is, if you tell them you can't, if you tell them you have to be quiet and you have to let them speak and give them the space, they're going to get bored, and their mind's going to start thinking about what I'm going to make for dinner tonight. Right. And so their minds start drifting. But if you give them an anchor, like, what else am I missing? What else are they trying to say? What are they not saying? Right. Mm-hmm. Asking yourself questions like that during the conversation can give you both the space to truly, truly get to some depth of understanding. And that is where the gold lies. That is where a solution waiting to be born lives.
All right. Well, I think these are a lot of really smart tips to help managers learn how they can coach their team members, and how leaders can coach their managers to become effective leaders as well. I think it's really important to hold the door open for those coming behind you, and so that's some great tips there. Jeff, thanks very much for the insights.
Thank you, Raj. Always a pleasure.
Okay.